I was standing at my living room window in Chicago, watching the last of the holiday snow drift in slow circles toward the quiet, a street below. The week after Christmas always feels a little hollow in this city, like everyone finally let go of the tension they carried through December. And now the world is hushed. I had the same old ceramic mug in my hands, the one with a fading blue rim, and I was letting the warmth sink into my palms while my mind wandered back to that strange Christmas morning when my dad told me not to come home. I was 34 years old, yet somehow it felt like I had been grounded by a man who still believed I belonged under his control. That was the moment my phone buzzed against the counter, vibrating hard enough to rattle the coffee spoon beside it. I remember thinking that I should let it go to voicemail. I remember telling myself that peace was more important than whatever storm waited on the other end. But I also remember the way my body moved before my mind caught up, reaching for the phone as if old habits had a stronger grip on me than I wanted to admit. I pressed the screen without checking the caller ID. The voice that greeted me was sharp, clipped, resting on anger that had probably been building long before he dialed my number. It was my dad. I had not heard from him since the day he told me to stay home and not ruin Christmas for everyone. In his world, the problem was always the child who tried too hard to be honest, and never the parent who ran from accountability. He announced, with no buildup, that they were flying my younger sister Sophia to Maui. He said it as if it were some royal decree, a lavish celebration only the chosen child deserved. He spoke about upgrades and reservations and private transportation. And while he went on, I realized that once again I was hearing about a trip I was not invited to, but was expected to fund. Then came the number. He told me to send $20,700 immediately. He said it as if it were a perfectly reasonable expectation, something any daughter would do if she cared enough. I held the phone to my ear and stared at the swirling snow outside, wondering if he truly believed I existed for no other reason than to clean up whatever financial mess he created. It would not have been the first time I asked why I should pay for a trip I knew nothing about. I kept my tone steady, controlled, the kind of voice you learn to use when someone has spent your entire life reacting to emotion like it is ammunition. He did not answer my question. Instead, he raised his voice. He said that if I refused, then I was dead to him, that I was no longer his daughter, that I was selfish, ungrateful, difficult, all the old familiar labels he dusted off whenever I resisted being manipulated. His voice rose higher until it no longer sounded like words, just force and fury pushing through the speaker. Something inside me detached then, quietly, like watching a door close from the other side. I ended the call without another word. The silence that followed was so deep that I could hear the refrigerator hum behind me. My living room felt larger than usual, almost cavernous. I set the phone down and walked back to the window. Snowflakes landed on the glass and melted into tiny droplets that traced slow paths downward. I thought of all the times I had stood in this spot replaying conversations with him, trying to understand why love in my family came with conditions. No one ever acknowledged out loud. I whispered to myself that if this was what family meant, then I would rather stand alone. The moment the words left my lips, something tightened and then released inside my chest. It felt like the beginning of a truth I had been circling for years, but never fully spoken. I turned away from the window and headed toward the small hallway closet, where I stored things I hoped I would never need. The light flickered when I switched it on. I reached beneath a stack of blankets for the safe I kept tucked behind them. It was small, black, and heavy in a way that suggested more than the metal contained. I always heard a slight groan from the hinge when I opened it, and this time, that sound felt like a quiet chapter creaking open. Inside were the documents I had gathered since the year 2021, papers I had printed at work before anyone arrived, statements I had requested without telling a soul, note I had written in tiny handwriting to remind myself of dates and transactions that did not add up. At the time, I had not planned anything. I was simply trying to understand what was happening around me, what role I had unwillingly played in the financial decisions my dad wrapped in secrecy. I did not know that the evidence I collected would eventually become my protection I lifted the folder out of the safe and sat with it on the living room floor. The carpet felt cold beneath me. I flipped open the first section, the one with the earliest statements, and felt that familiar sting of disbelief mixed with resignation. Charges that did not belong to me. Purchases for Sophia, payments toward things I had never agreed to fund, little breadcrumbs of misuse that at first had confused me, then frightened me, then angered me so deeply I no longer trusted myself to confront him without proof. I thought about my mom, Evelyn, a woman who could smooth tension with a soft sigh and a careful smile, someone who avoided conflict so completely that she floated above it without ever landing in reality. She loved Sophia with the kind of intensity that blinded her to everything else, especially the weight placed on me. Confrontation to her was a dangerous thing, something to dodge at all costs. I thought of Sophia, bright and admired, surrounded by friends and opportunities, shielded from consequences by a dad who insisted she deserved the best. She never asked where the money came from, because she never needed to. Someone always took care of it. Someone usually meant me. And then there was Sam, my youngest sister, barely out of high school, soft-spoken, introspective, someone who absorbed more than she said. There were moments when I wondered if she recognized the imbalance in our home, or if she believed that families were naturally built on uneven ground. I spread the documents across the carpet, pages overlapping like a map of every moment I had been taken advantage of. They no longer looked like isolated incidents or unlucky mistakes. They formed a pattern, a deliberate path of expectation and entitlement that my dad had carved out. Over years, trusting that I would never challenge him. Outside, the snow continued to fall, heavy now, turning the street into a white blur. My apartment felt warm and solid around me, and for the first time in a long while, I felt safe enough to see things clearly. I took a deep breath, steady and full, and thought about everything ahead of me. This was not about destroying my family. It was about stepping out of the role they had assigned me without my permission. People talk about self-respect like it is a lesson learned in a single moment. But what I felt that night was built slowly, shaped by years of quiet bruises on the heart. I gathered the papers into a neat stack and returned them to the folder. My hands were steady. My pulse was calm. I knew that what happened next would change everything. But for the first time in my life, that did not frighten me. It felt like the natural consequence of finally choosing myself after spending decades choosing everyone else. If you have ever been treated like an outsider in your own family, or if you have ever carried burdens no one thanked you for, then I hope you stay with me. I promise this story goes somewhere unexpected, somewhere honest, somewhere freeing. And I would love to know where you are as you listen, because when this all began, I was just a woman on a living room floor with a mug of cold coffee and a stack of truths I could no longer ignore. I stood, closed the closet, and looked once more at the city, breathing beneath the snow. Everything was quiet. But it was not the suffocating quiet of being silenced. It was the quiet before a step forward. The quiet before a door opens. That was the night everything began. I closed the closet door and let the quiet settle again. But my mind was already drifting back to the year everything first cracked open. It was strange how a single night in the present could pull up memories I had spent 3 years keeping in careful order, like files I never meant to open unless I absolutely had to. The truth was that none of what happened this week had come out of nowhere. My family thought I floated through life, naive and obedient, but they never understood how closely I watched the things they assumed I would never question. Back in 2021, I was sitting at my kitchen table on a warm August evening when I first noticed something odd. I had paid a few bills earlier that morning and, without thinking, logged into my Wells Fargo account after work, just to check my balance. It was a habit I had picked up in my 20s, something about wanting to feel in control of at least one corner of my life. There was a tab I almost never clicked, the one for linked credit accounts. That night, for some reason I still cannot explain, I clicked it. A new card appeared under my name. I blinked at it, assuming it was an error, but it was not an error. It was active. It carried a balance. And the purchases were recent. I remembered sitting perfectly still, staring at the screen while my stomach tightened like someone was twisting it, slowly, with their fist. I scrolled through the charges. Some were small, scattered, easy to overlook. Then, I saw the larger ones. Tuition payments for something labeled Advanced Modeling Workshop. Airline tickets from Chicago to Honolulu with 2 names attached, Sophia and someone named Lindsay. And then a transfer I did not understand at all. A payment to Parker Financial with my name attached. I leaned back and let the chair creak under me. I knew instantly who had done it. I also knew exactly how it would play out if I confronted them. David would deny it. Mom would smooth it over. Sophia would laugh it off. And I would be pushed back into the corner where I had always been expected to stay. The quiet one. The dependable one. The daughter who never caused trouble, no matter how much trouble others caused. Her. Instead of reacting, I opened a new folder on my laptop. I saved every screenshot, every monthly statement, every confirmation number. I printed the pages and placed them in a drawer with a stack of blank envelopes. I labeled nothing, wanting it to look harmless if anyone ever found it. But I memorized every page. As the weeks went on, the pattern became unmistakable. Sophia enrolled in another course. More tickets, more purchases, more money pulled from things that bore my name but never passed through my hands. The charges added up with a kind of shameless confidence, like the person spending the money believed the world existed to cushion her desires. I watched how Mom reacted whenever I asked casual questions about Sophia. She would smile with a softness she never used with Sam or me. She described Sophia as gifted and luminous and deserving, words that never found their way toward the rest of us. If I asked about expenses, she waved them aside, as if talking about money cheapened the love she wanted to believe our family had. If I asked about fairness, she changed the subject. Meanwhile, Sam grew quieter. She had always been gentle, someone whose presence felt like a soft blanket on a cold day. But during that year, she retreated further into her room, her books, her silence. She did not complain, not even when Sophia was celebrated for things Sam actually worked harder at. Mom rarely noticed the way Sam shrank into the background. Dad never did. One afternoon that fall, while sipping lukewarm coffee at my desk after a long marketing meeting, I ordered my full credit report. The email arrived within minutes. I opened it without much thought, expecting the same card I had already found, maybe 2 at most. There were 3 credit cards under my name. 3. 2 of them had been opened the same month. 1 linked to the modeling program. 1 linked to airline purchase after airline purchase. 1 tied to something else entirely. An open line linked to Parker Financial again. I clicked through the details, my heart thudding harder with each new page. The charges for Sophia were bad enough, but the last entry made me sit forward sharply. It was a business loan listing me as co-signer. A loan I had never agreed to. A loan I had never even heard of. I remember touching the line on the screen, as if the physical contact could somehow make the information less real. The signature on the digital file was not mine. The initials typed were not mine, yet the bank recognized the authorization. My first instinct was anger, fast and hot, rising through my chest like a flame. But beneath the anger was a deeper feeling, something steadier, something colder. It was the dawning realization that someone had assumed I would never look too closely. Someone had counted on me being dutiful and exhausted and trusting. Someone had gambled that I would continue playing the role of the invisible daughter, so they could use my name like an extra credit card. I closed the report, leaned back in my chair, and let out a long, slow breath. A thought surfaced in my mind with a clarity that surprised me. They think I do not know. They think I will never know. They think this game will go on forever. I decided that night that I would not confront them. I would not warn them. I would not say a word that might tip them off. My silence would be my shield. My quiet would be my strategy. I spent the rest of 2021 gathering everything. Each statement printed twice. Each screenshot backed up in 2 places. Each suspicious transfer marked in a notebook only I had access to. I learned to catalog without emotion, to observe without reacting. I trained myself into a level of calm that felt like armor. All around me, the family dynamics continued without a single tremor. Sophie sparkled. Mom hovered around her like she was made of glass and starlight. Adam boasted about the opportunities Sophia received, never mentioning the bills he quietly redirected into my name. And Sam drifted through the house like a ghost, unnoticed except by me. I remember visiting home one weekend and watching Sophia open a package filled with expensive clothing for another workshop she was attending somewhere near Los Angeles. She held each item up to the light, smiling wide, while Mom clapped her hands softly, like she was admiring a wedding gown. Dad talked loudly about networking and talent and potential. Sam said nothing. I sat in the corner of the room, sipping lukewarm tea, and felt the weight of all the secrets I carried. It was strange how heavy silence could be. It felt as though I was always half holding my breath, waiting for the moment when someone would realize I knew too much. But no one looked my way long enough to see the change in me. On my drive back to Chicago that night, I replayed every moment from the previous months, somewhere between Milwaukee and Kenosha. As the highway stretched long and dark in front of me, I had the first quiet spark of a thought that would grow into something far larger. You think I do not know, but I know everything. I pressed my foot to the gas a little harder and let the hum of the tires steady me. The truth was no longer a weight. It was a compass. It was direction. It was proof that when the day came, I would not be caught off guard. I would not be the unprepared daughter my dad always assumed I was. I would be ready. And that readiness was beginning to take shape in ways even I did not fully understand yet. I think a part of me had always known the day would come when I would stop, quietly collecting, and start acting. It did not arrive as some dramatic moment with thunder and shouting. It came in small nudges, in tired mornings and long evenings, and in the way my chest felt heavier every time I saw my name tied to something I had not chosen. The morning after that call from my dad, I woke up earlier than usual. The winter light in Chicago was pale and soft, early stretching across my bedroom floor. For a moment, lying there under the blanket, I thought maybe I had dreamed it all. Then I reached for my phone and saw the missed calls, the angry voicemail icons, and I knew it was real. I showered, dressed, and made coffee in a kind of automatic rhythm, the way you do when your body knows the steps better than your mind. But beneath that routine, there was a new layer, something sharper and more focused. As the coffee machine hummed, I pulled my laptop onto the kitchen counter and opened the folder where I kept all my digital copies. I scrolled through years of statements, snap-oats of my life and my family's choices laid out in numbers and dates. I organized them into subfolders, label in ways that would make sense to someone who had never met me. Personal accounts, unauthorized credit cards, travel charges, modeling programs, transfers to Parker Financial, the business loan with my name as co-signer. By the time I finished, the sun had climbed higher, though the sky still looked like blank paper. I checked the time and then opened another tab. I searched for an attorney in Chicago who specialized in both consumer protection and business issues. I did not want someone who would see this only as a family dispute. I needed someone who understood financial boundaries and what happened when they were ignored. That is how I found Ethan Clark. His office was in a building just off the river, one of those glass and steel towers that always seem a little colder than the rest of the city. I called, half expecting to be pushed weeks out, but the receptionist said they had a cancellation for that afternoon. I took it, grabbed my folder from the safe, and left the apartment with my heart pounding a little faster than usual. The train ride downtown felt different that day. I watched people around me staring at their phones, reading, dozing, and I wondered how many of them were carrying quiet burdens like mine. How many had stories they never told because they were afraid no one would believe them. When my stop came, I stepped off into the cold air and walked toward the building with a kind of steady determination I had not felt in a long time. Ethan's office was on one of the higher floors. The waiting area smelled like coffee and printer ink. Framed degrees lined the wall behind the receptionist, and the chairs were the kind that tried to be comfortable but never quite managed it. My hands were wrapped tightly around the folder by the time his door opened, and he appeared. He looked to be in his 40s, with kind eyes, and the sort of posture that suggested he had listened to a lot of hard stories over the years. He invited me in with a small nod, and I stepped into his office, taking in the shelves of law books, the neat desk, the view of the river half frozen below. I sat down across from him, set the folder on my lap, and took one deep breath. He started with the usual questions: name, background, what brought me there. I told him that my name was Aya, that I worked in marketing, that I lived in the city, and that my family was involved with a company called Parker Financial. Then I told him that for several years, my name and my social security number had been used in ways I had not consented to. I kept my voice calm, my words clear. After I finished the outline, I placed the folder on his desk and slid it toward him. He opened it, and the expression on his face shifted from neutral attention to something closer to concern. He flipped through the pages slowly at first, then more carefully, pausing to read certain entries. He asked me how long I had been keeping all of this. I told him it started at 2021, when I found the first Wells Fargo card I had not opened. I told him about ordering my credit report, about finding 2 more cards and a business loan tied to Parker Financial with my name as co-signer. I told him about the travel purchases for Sophia, the modeling workshops, the transfers to the company, all tied back to accounts I had never agreed to. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a low breath. He said that most people came to him after things had gotten completely out of control, with no proof, no paperwork, no timeline. He said that what I had done, keeping track, organizing, printing, and saving, was one of the smartest things he had seen in a long time. Hearing that did something quiet inside me. For so many years, my family had made me feel like I was difficult, dramatic, and unreasonable. And now, in this small office overlooking a frozen river, someone finally told me that I had been wise. We went over the situation step by step, in terms I could understand. He explained that the first thing we needed to do was protect me, my credit, my record, my name. He suggested a credit freeze with the major bureaus, so no one could open anything new under my information. He said we should file formal identity fraud reports about the cards and the loan I had never signed for. Then we talked about the bank that issued the business loan for Parker Financial, the one where my name appeared as co-signer. He pointed out the signature line and asked if I had ever written my name that way. I shook my head. He nodded like he had expected that answer. He said we would need to contact the bank directly, send them copies of my actual signature, my identification, and a statement that I had not authorized that loan. He mentioned that the bank would likely open an investigation into how that paperwork had been approved. He told me not to be surprised if things got noisy after that. The more he talked, the more I realized the shape of what my dad had been doing. This was not a one-time mistake. This was a pattern, a habit of crossing lines that did not belong to him. The realization hurt and relieved me at the same time. Hurt, because it confirmed what I had feared. Relieved, because I finally knew I was not imagining it. We discussed withdrawing my name from any authorization tied to the loan, making it clear that I would not be responsible for payments, defaults, or any fallout. Ethan said it might take time, but the process was worth starting now, before things got worse. As he spoke, I watched his hands move over the documents, marking the ones he wanted copies of, separating them into smaller stacks. Fraud evidence, loan documents, credit history. It was exactly how I had organized them in my mind for years, and seeing someone else do it made me feel less alone. At one point, he paused and asked me a different kind of question. He wanted to know why I had waited this long to come in, given how much I already knew. I sat there for a moment, looking out at the river, thinking about all the holidays, birthdays, and Sunday dinners spent keeping the peace instead of telling the truth. I told him that in my family, speaking up made you the problem. I told him that I had spent my whole life trying to keep everyone calm, to keep things from exploding, to keep the image of a good family intact. I told him that until my dad called and told me I was dead to him over money, he had no right to demand. I had still believed there was a chance things might get better on their own. He listened without interrupting, then said gently that families like mine were exactly why he did what he did. He said this was not about punishing anyone. It was about drawing a line around my life and saying, this is where you stop. We spent the next hour setting things in motion. He dictated notes to his assistant in another room, asking for fraud report forms, bank contact information, and templates for letters that would go out under my name. I signed the documents that were truly mine to sign. We drafted a statement for the bank that explained my lack of consent regarding the business loan. By the time I left his office, the winter light was already fading outside. The receptionist gave me a small stack of copied papers in a plain folder, more for my records than anything else. I stepped out into the cold air and pulled my coat tighter around me. On the train ride home, my phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from numbers I recognized and some I did not. I turned it face down on my lap and watched my reflection in the dark window. Instead, I saw a woman who was tired, but not broken. I saw someone who had stopped waiting for permission to protect herself. When I got back to my apartment, I took off my coat, set my bag on the counter, and walked straight to my laptop. An email from Ethan was already waiting. He had forwarded the response from the bank that held the Parker Financial loan. It was a short message acknowledging receipt of my claim and indicating that the account in question had, in their words, been under internal review for approximately 2 years due to unusual activity. I stared at that one sentence for a long time. Under internal review for approximately 2 years. So it was not just me. It was not all in my head. The bank had seen something off long before I ever walked into that office. I felt no surprise, only a slow confirmation of what I had been sensing in my bones. My dad was not just bending rules, he was breaking them over and over in ways that had finally caught someone else's attention. I opened my banking app and looked at the balance in my checking account. The numbers stared back at me, solid and real. I thought of the last words my dad had thrown at me. The threat, the attempt to make me feel small and guilty for not handing over $1,700 on command. I moved that exact amount into a new savings account I had opened quietly, months before, one I had named in my head but never labeled on any official form. Freedom Fund. That is what I called it when I thought about my future. Money meant for my life, my safety, my choices. Not for chaos, not for cover-ups, not for funding trips that doubled as distractions from bad decisions. As I watched the transfer complete, a calm settled over me. I was not hiding. I was not sneaking. I was choosing to invest in myself rather than in a system that had taken from me for years without remorse. Outside my window, the snow had started again, light and steady. The city glowed softly under the streetlights. I stood there for a moment, feeling the floor firm under my feet, my own breath steady in my chest. I had taken the first real step, and there was no going back now. When I woke the next morning, the apartment felt unnaturally still, like the quiet you feel right before a storm reaches the windows. I made coffee, stood barefoot in my kitchen, and stared at the dark surface of the lake outside my window. The world looked unchanged, but something around me, something in me, had shifted. I could feel it in that subtle tightness behind my ribs, the one that told me I had crossed a line I would never uncross. My phone lit up on the counter. Then it lit up again. The vibration rattled against the granite. I let it ring. I knew the pattern well enough to guess who it was. First my dad, then my mom, then Sophia. I had already blocked all 3 numbers the night before, a small act that felt like placing a thick door between me and the chaos I had grown up inside. But people like them always found another way through. Within 10 minutes, my work phone began to buzz. I stared at it for a long second, then walked over and let it go to voicemail. It buzzed again almost immediately. And again. Finally, out of sheer annoyance more than curiosity, I stepped into my office and pressed the voicemail button. My dad's voice came through the speaker in a low, tight rasp. He sounded enraged, but underneath the rage was something I had rarely heard from him. A tremble, not of sadness, of fear. He said that he knew what I had done. He said that the bank was calling him, asking questions about signatures and authorizations. He said that his business partners were nervous now, and that if anything happened to his company, it would be on me. He said that I needed to call him back immediately before I made things worse. He tried to coat his voice in authority, but I heard the cracks. It was the sound of a man who built an entire kingdom on sand and could suddenly feel the ocean rising. I deleted the voicemail. I returned to my coffee, though by then it had grown cold. I warmed it in the microwave, leaning against the counter while the machine hummed. For a moment, I let myself imagine that this was just another morning in my life, that I was simply going about my routine without the complicated weight of family stretched across my thoughts. but the truth sat with me like a shadow. They were unraveling, and for the first time, I was not stepping in to fix anything. When I checked my email, I saw a message from Sophia. The subject line was all capital letters. Her words were sharp, written with the kind of self-righteousness that came effortlessly to her. She demanded to know what I had done to cause the bank to call Dad. She said that he was stressed and not sleeping, that Mom was crying, that the Maui trip might be ruined, and that if I cared at all about the family, I would stop whatever game I was playing. It struck me how quickly their narrative formed. I was always the problem, even when all I had done was refuse to fund a vacation and protect my own financial life. They did not ask what happened. They did not ask if I was all right. They did not ask if I needed anything. They only asked what I had done to inconvenience them. Another message arrived less than 5 minutes later. This one, from Mom. Her email was long and winding, full of phrases I had heard many times. She wrote about family unity and sacrifices and disappointment. She wrote that times were tough for my dad and that I should be more understanding. She wrote that Sophia had so much pressure on her lately and that I should not add to her stress. She wrote that I was being dramatic and unkind by blocking them, as if blocking their numbers was an act of cruelty instead of an act of survival. She ended the message by saying she hoped I would come to my senses. I closed the email without replying. The rest of the morning moved slowly. I could feel the tension tightening around the edges of my day. It was like waiting for glass to break, knowing it would happen, not knowing when. Around noon, I received a call from Ethan. His voice was calm, measured, the kind of tone that grounded me instantly. He told me that the bank had received my documentation. He said they were formally requesting signature verification from Parker, financial and from any associated accounts. It was the first official step in a process that could reveal everything my dad had been doing in my name. When he said the words, signature verification, I felt a slow exhale leave my chest. This was not vengeance. This was accountability. And accountability often looked like a mirror someone had avoided for years. After I hung up, I sat for a long moment at my desk. The office around me hummed with the usual background noise. People chatting in the hallway, typing, phones ringing. Everything in the world looked ordinary, but my life had taken a turn so sharp that the ordinary felt unreal. That was when the email notification appeared on my screen. Wells Fargo account alert. My pulse jumped. I clicked the message and scanned the text. It listed several transactions flagged as potentially fraudulent. Purchases made at odd hours, in odd locations, inconsistent with my established patterns. The bank was asking if I recognized the charges. I leaned back slowly in my chair. It was happening faster than I expected. The unraveling. The patterns that had gone unnoticed for years were suddenly bright under the light of scrutiny. I thought about the folder in my safe, the one I had organized so carefully. I thought of every time I had wondered if I was imagining things. I was reading too much into numbers and dates. Now the evidence was rising on its own, without me touching a thing. I forwarded the alert to Ethan, and then closed my laptop. My hands felt strangely steady. My heartbeat had slowed. A quiet truth rose in my mind. I did not start this fire. I simply stepped back and let them hold their own match. I walked to the window and looked out at the lake again. The afternoon light had deepened, turned the water into a dark sheet flecked with silver. A few runners moved along the shoreline path, bundled against the cold. Life was happening everywhere, effortlessly. And here I was, finally watching my own life from a place of clarity instead of confusion. Behind me, my work phone buzzed again. I let it buzz. For the first time in years, I felt something like space open around me. Space that did not belong to anyone else's expectations or demands. It felt like the start of something. Not dramatic, not flashy, just a quiet shift toward freedom. I knew the next few days would bring more noise from my family, more accusations, more attempts to pull me back into a role I no longer played. But standing by the window, watching the winter light dim, I felt strangely ready. Ready for whatever came next. The next came faster than I expected. By midweek, Chicago felt even colder than usual. The kind of cold that pressed against the windows and slipped through the seams of your coat. I curled my hands around a mug of herbal tea at my desk, trying to focus on my latest campaign notes, when a news alert flashed across the corner of my screen. Parker Financial Leadership facing internal review. I froze, staring at the headline. It was from a small business journal, the kind of publication that picked up rumors early and confirmed them later. I clicked the link. The article was vague, only a few paragraphs, but the words were unmistakable. Questions regarding recent financial activity. Partners requesting documentation. Concerns over unauthorized transactions. I leaned back slowly. Parker Financial was my dad's pride, his fortress, the thing he pointed to whenever he wanted to justify his temper or his decisions. Seeing it listed publicly as unstable felt surreal, like watching a crack form in a stone I had always assumed unbreakable. My office phone rang before I even finished reading the article. I let it ring twice before answering, expecting a client. Instead, Mom's voice came through, thinner than I had ever heard it. She did not sound angry this time. She sounded terrified. "Aya, what did you do? Your dad is out of his mind. He says the bank contacted his partners. He says they are watching him. What did you send them?" I stared out the window while she spoke, watching a slow stream of cars move past on the street. Her words were shaky, uneven, not full of the practiced guilt she usually used on me. This was something different. "Mom," I began calmly, "everything the bank is doing started because of transactions your husband made, not me." She inhaled sharply. "That is not what he said. He said you triggered something. He said you were trying to destroy him." I rubbed my forehead with my free hand. I could almost picture her standing in the kitchen back home, one hand on the counter, one hand clutching her phone, her eyes darting toward my dad, who was probably pacing like a caged animal. "Mom, everything happening now began long before I touched anything. The bank saw it. The partners saw it. I only reported what was done using my name." She grew quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice trembled. "Your dad said the company could fall apart over this. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand what people will think?" A long silence stretched between us. I looked down at the Wells Fargo alert still open on my laptop. The flagged transactions, the warnings. The truth was right there, and yet she still wanted me to protect the illusion. I finally said softly, "Mom, this was already happening. You just did not see it." She ended the call without responding. I set my phone down and took a slow breath. I did not feel triumphant. I felt a hollow ache in my ribs, like the ghost of something old and familiar, finally letting go. The chaos did not stop there. That afternoon, I received an email from Sophia, not angry this time, confused, panicked. She wrote that Dad was not answering her questions, that he shut himself in his home office and refused to talk. She said Mom was frantically calling accountants she barely knew. She said Sam looked scared when she passed him in the hallway, like she sensed something no one would say out loud. I pictured Sam's wide eyes, the way she absorbed everything around her. Growing up, she always seemed to understand more than she let on, sensing tension before anyone acknowledged it. I wondered what this unraveling looked like from her perspective, watching the people she trusted fall apart without explanation. My workday blurred into evening. When I finally gathered my things to go home, the office hallway lights felt too bright, too sterile. I stepped into the elevator and kept my mind steady, refusing to spiral. As I walked toward the exit, the receptionist called my name. She looked uncertain, glancing toward the lobby. "Someone is here asking for you." My heart tightened. I stepped through the glass doors and froze. Mom stood in the lobby. She was still wearing her winter coat, her hair slightly out of place, her face pale in a way I had not seen since childhood. When she spotted me, she rushed forward, her voice cracking before she even formed full words. "Aya, please tell me you can undo this. Tell me you can retract whatever you filed. Tell me the bank will stop asking questions if you explain that this was just a misunderstanding." Her hands trembled as she held them out like she expected me to catch them, steady them, rescue them, the same way she always wanted me to rescue peace when Dad erupted at home. I took a slow breath and kept my voice quiet but firm. "Mom, I did not accuse anyone. I did not file charges. I only reported accounts opened with my name. The rest is between Dad and the bank." She shook her head hard, her voice breaking into small pieces. "You do not understand. Your dad cannot handle this kind of pressure. The partners are threatening to pull out. They are asking for audits. He says this is going to ruin everything." I felt a sharp tug inside, an old instinct to step in, smooth things over, be the daughter who fixed what others broke. But those instincts had kept me trapped for decades, and I was not stepping back into that role. "Mom," I said gently, "I am not responsible for the mistakes he made." She stared at me with wide, wounded eyes, as if hearing that truth was a betrayal instead of simple reality. "You always were the strong one," she whispered. "You could have helped him." I met her gaze and let the full truth settle between us. I did not burn anything down. I just stopped holding up the walls he built. For a moment, she looked like she might argue. Then something in her expression shifted. A small, stunned flicker, like the first crack in denial. She looked down at the floor, her mouth opening and closing without words. I waited, calm. She finally lifted her eyes again, but whatever she hoped to find in mine was not there anymore. Not the compliance, not the guilt, not the fear. She straightened her coat, nodded stiffly, and walked toward the door. She did not look back. I stood in the lobby long after she left, listening to the soft hum of the building, feeling the weight of her desperation linger in the air. My life had never felt more separate from theirs than it did in that moment. When I stepped outside into the cold night, the sky hung low with heavy clouds. Snow began to drift down again, soft and quiet, landing on my coat like a whisper of something ending. The glass doors closed behind me, and with them, a chapter of my life that I knew would never reopen in the same way. I went home that night more tired than I wanted to admit. I kicked off my boots just inside the door, hung my coat on the hook, and stood there in the entryway for a long moment, listening to the hum of the heater and the faint traffic sounds from the street below. It felt like the world was split in two. Inside my apartment, things were steady, calm, mine. Outside, my family was spinning. I heated up leftover soup, ate it over the sink without really tasting it, and then let myself fall into bed. For the first time in a long time, I did not dream of arguments with my dad or awkward holiday dinners. I slept heavily, like my body finally believed I was allowed to rest. The next morning, my phone buzzed before my alarm even had the chance to go off. I reached for it, blinking at the screen. Unknown number. Normally, that would have sent a small jolt of anxiety through me, but this time, I just watched it ring until it stopped. A minute later, it buzzed again, this time with a text. It was Sophia. She had somehow found a way around being blocked by calling and texting from a different number. The message was shorter than her usual dramatic paragraphs. It said she needed to talk to me and that it could not be at home. She asked if I would meet her somewhere in the city, somewhere neutral. I lay there staring at the message, trying to read between the lines. Sophia never used the word neutral. That word belonged to therapy sessions and custody agreements, not to my sister, who had always believed the world bent around her. Something in her tone was cracked in a way I did not recognize. I typed back the name of a small coffee shop near the river that I liked, just a few blocks from my office. Quiet. No one from my family knew it. She answered within seconds. She would take an early flight and be there by late afternoon. The day at work passed in a haze of meetings and half-finished emails. I sat through a strategy session, nodded in the right places, and made notes. On the surface, I was the same marketing manager I had always been. Inside, it felt like I had a second life running parallel, one that had nothing to do with sales projections or campaign timelines. By the time I walked to the coffee shop, the winter sky had dimmed to that flat gray that always makes Chicago feel like a photograph of itself. The bell over the door chimed softly when I stepped inside. The place smelled like roasted beans and cinnamon. A few people sat hunched over laptops, headphones in, worlds away. I ordered tea and chose a table near the back, where I could see both the entrance and the street. My heart beat a little faster with each person who walked in, then slowed again when they turned out to be strangers. Finally, the door opened, and my sister stepped inside. Sophia looked smaller than I remembered. Which was strange, because she had always carried herself like she took up more space than anyone else in the room. Her usually polished hair was pulled into a messy knot. There were faint shadows under her eyes. When she saw me, she hesitated, like she was not entirely sure I would stay. She walked over and sat down without hugging me. That alone told me how rattled she was. For a moment, we just looked at each other, taking in the changes time and distance and truth had carved into our faces. She spoke first. Her voice was softer than I had heard it in years. "I do not even know where to start," she said, looking down at her hands. "I feel like someone took my whole life and shook it." I let her talk. She told me about the last few days in that big house back in the suburbs. She said Dad had been stalking around, snapping at everyone, taking calls behind closed doors, yelling into his phone at people she had never heard of. She said Mom had stopped cooking, stopped tidying, stopped pretending. She just wandered from room to room, talked to herself about lawyers and reputations. I asked about Sam and saw something flicker in Sophia's eyes. "Sam is scared," she admitted. "She hears everything. Nobody talks to her like an adult. But she still knows when things are wrong." The way she said it made me wonder if she finally realized she had been one of the people who talked around Sam instead of to her. Then Sophia looked up at me. There was something raw in her expression, a mixture of guilt and confusion. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to tell me the truth, even if it hurts." I nodded. "Go ahead." She took a deep breath like a swimmer about to dive into cold water. "Has Dad been doing this to you for years?" she asked. "Using you, your name, your accounts?" The question was simple. The weight behind it was not. I could have softened the answer. I could have told her it was complicated, but I was done cushioning the truth. "Yes," I said. "For years." Her shoulders sagged. She stared at the table for a long moment. Then she asked what exactly that meant. So I told her. I told her about the first time in 2021 when I saw that Wells Fargo credit card I had not opened. I told her about ordering my credit report and finding 2 more cards, all under my name, all carrying charges I had not made. I told her about the tuition payments labeled Advanced Modeling Workshop, the travel costs for flights to Hawaii and California, the luxury clothing stores, the hotel stays. I watched her face as I spoke, the way confusion shifted to disbelief, the way disbelief slowly morphed into recognition. Deep down, I think she had always known that opportunities did not fall from the sky. Someone had to pay for them. She just never asked who. I told her about the business loan tied to Parker Financial. I described sitting at my kitchen table, staring at a signature that was supposed to be mine, but was not. I explained how that one line on that one document had changed the way I saw everything that followed. She brought her hand to her mouth as if she could push her reaction back in. "David put your name on a loan," she whispered, without asking. "How is that even possible?" I told her that in families like ours, it was possible because people trusted the wrong person completely and never imagined he would cross certain lines. Banks trusted paperwork. My parents trusted Dad. And until I saw the evidence, I had trusted them all. I could feel the anger rising off her like heat, but it was not aimed at me. For once, it was aimed at the person who deserved it. She pressed her palms flat on the table. "Wait," she said slowly. "Those programs I went to, those flights, those hotels. He always told me he had it covered, that it was part of his networking budget, that he knew how to make things work. He did make things work," I said quietly, "by using me as the cushion." Tears filled her eyes. Not the theatrical kind she sometimes used growing up, but the heavy kind that comes when the story you have believed about your life collapses in front of you. "Why did you not say anything?" she asked, and there was no accusation in it, only a deep, wounded curiosity. "Why did you not tell me?" I sat back and watched the steam from my tea curl upward before answering. "Soph," I said, "every time I tried to bring up money or fairness before, I became the villain. Dad spun it. Mom begged me to let it go. You rolled your eyes and sided with them. I knew that if I spoke up without proof, I would lose, and I would lose alone." She flinched at that, then nodded slowly. as if replaying scenes from our childhood in her mind and seeing them clearly for the first time. "You are right," she admitted. "I did that." I believed him because it was easier. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the sounds of the coffee shop filling in the space between us. Cups clinked, milk steamed. A song I vaguely recognized played low over the speakers. Sophia wiped at her face, then drew a shaky breath. "He told us you started all this," she said. "He said you wanted to ruin him for not taking your side in some old argument." Mom believed it. I almost did too. But then he would not answer basic questions. He would not look at me. He just kept saying everyone was against him. Her jaw tightened. It scared me more that he was lying than if he had just admitted he screwed it up. I nodded. That was always his pattern. The lie came first. The rage came second. Accountability never came at all. She looked at me with something I had rarely seen from her. Respect. "So what now?" she asked softly. "What happens to us?" For a moment, I did not know how to answer. Then I realized that was part of the truth, too. I did not know. There was freedom in admitting that. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Mom. One short line that said she needed to talk. Against my better judgment, I texted back that I had 10 minutes. She called almost immediately. I pressed the speaker and set the phone between us. Her voice came through, thin and frayed. "Aya, your dad is unraveling," she said. "The bank is digging into records. The partners are circling. And now there are whispers of auditors. We cannot hold this together if you keep pushing." I closed my eyes for a second, steadying myself. "I'm not pushing anything," I answered. "The bank is doing what it should have done a long time ago." Mom made a choked sound. "You sound just like them," she said. Cold, clinical. "Do you even care what happens to us?" There was that word again. Us, as if I was not part of the family years before this moment. She rushed on before I could respond, her nerves spilling out into half-formed thoughts. "All of this could make the other situation blow up too," she said. "What if they start looking at the money that went to that woman in San Diego? What if her landlord talks? What if the kids ask questions?" The words hung in the air like smoke. Across the table, Sophia's head snapped up. Her eyes widened. She mouthed "San Diego" at me, her lips forming the words without sound. I felt a calm settle over me, the kind that comes when something you have carried alone for years is finally dragged into the light. I spoke into the phone, my voice even. "Mom," I said, "I have known about the woman in San Diego since 2020. I saw the transfer records. I saw the photos. None of that is my mess to clean up." For a long moment, there was only silence on the line. Then Mom whispered a faint, "Oh," and hung up. The call disconnected. The coffee shop noise faded into the background. For a second, it felt like time had paused. Sophia stared at me as if I had just told her the sky was not really blue. "What do you mean?" she said finally, her voice rough. "What a woman. What kids?" I looked at her and saw the girl she used to be. The one who believed our dad walked on water, standing side by side with the woman she was now, confronting the truth that he had been standing on everyone else's shoulders, just to keep his image above water. The family we grew up in had always felt off balance. That day in the coffee shop, I watched the illusion finally start to crack. When I left Sophia, the sky over Chicago had turned the soft, bruised color it gets right before dusk. Somewhere between blue and purple, like the day could not decide whether to hold on or surrender. I walked home slowly, hands shoved deep into my coat pockets, the wind slicing across my cheeks. My mind kept replaying the look in my sister's eyes when she realized Dad had not just stretched the truth, he had built a life on it. Back in my apartment, I changed into sweatpants, put water on for tea, and sat on the couch without turning on the television. I just sat there, listening to the radiator clank and the faint honk of traffic several floors below. It felt like the whole world had shifted a few inches to the left, and I was still trying to regain my balance. I knew I had crossed a line that could not be crossed back. I had gone from silence to action, from observation to exposure. When you do that with people who are used to controlling the narrative, there is always a moment when they strike. It came later that night. My phone, the one I used for personal calls, lit up with a number I did not recognize. Out-of-state area code, but my gut knew exactly where it was from. My dad had run out of known numbers to use, so now he was borrowing others. For a second, my thumb hovered over the reject button. Then something steadier inside me whispered that this was the very moment I had been preparing for. Not to argue, not to explain, to witness. I opened my voice memo app and pressed record. The red bar slid across the screen. I let the call ring twice more, then answered and put it on speaker, setting the phone gently on the coffee table in front of me. I did not say hello. I let him speak first. His voice crashed into the room, loud and feral. There was no greeting, no pretense. He launched straight into accusations, his words tumbling over each other. He said I had betrayed him, betrayed the family, betrayed the company that fed us. He said I had aligned myself with the bank, with his enemies, with people who wanted to tear him down. I sat back against the couch, folded my hands in my lap, and focused on breathing evenly through my nose. I wanted my voice, when I finally used it, to be steady. He kept going. He said he had spoken to lawyers who told him he could sue me for defamation, for interference, for whatever else his panicked mind could string together. He said he could call the police and have me arrested for filing false reports. He said he could call my employer and tell them I was unstable and vindictive and not to be trusted. He spit out the words like they were bullets, each threat meant to make me flinch. Through all of it, I did not say a word. Here's the thing about rage. If you do not feed it, it reveals itself. Without someone else to push against, it eventually shows where it really comes from. He accused me of turning the bank against him, of telling them where to look. He said that before I started meddling, everything was fine. Payments were going through. Clients were happy. Partners were quiet. That was my first quiet confirmation that he knew things were wrong long before anyone contacted him. He kept pacing verbally, his voice rising and falling, sometimes almost cracking. I could hear a television in the background, then a door closing, like he had moved into another room to shout freely. At one point, he called me ungrateful for all the years he had, in his words, taken care of my financial burdens. He said no one had to know how many times he had rescued me, how many times he had stepped in. The projection in that statement would have almost made me laugh if it had not. Also hurt so deeply. I let him talk, let him tangle himself tighter. When he paused to inhale, maybe to gather more ammunition, I finally spoke. My voice sounded calm, almost detached even in my own ears. I told him I did not take responsibility for what he had done with his company or with my name. I said that whatever investigations were happening now were about his decisions, not mine. There was a beat of silence on the line. Then he exploded. He accused me of acting like I was innocent, of pretending I had no idea how things worked. He said that using my social security number for that business loan had been no big deal, that plenty of families did things like that I owed him support after everything he had supposedly given me. He said that putting credit cards in my name to cover Sophia's expenses was reasonable, because I was the one with the so-called big job and no children. He said all of that in a rush, trying to justify what he clearly knew should not have been done. In the process, he admitted more than I could have ever dragged out of him in a controlled conversation. He admitted that he had opened cards under my name without asking. He admitted he had moved money around between my accounts and his business. He admitted he had used my identity as collateral, a backup plan, a cushion to protect himself when his own choices caused damage. Every word was being recorded. I stared at the phone on the table, watching the seconds tick by on the screen, and realized that this was not just a meltdown. This was evidence. Raw, unfiltered, coming straight from the source. He circled back to the same threats, promising that if I did not contact the bank and withdraw my fraud reports, he would make sure I regretted it for the rest of my life. He said no one would believe me over him, that I would look like the bitter daughter trying to destroy her dad's legacy. Once upon a time, those words would have worked. They would have sent me scrambling to fix everything, to apologize for upsetting him, to smooth over his mess like it was mine. But that night, sitting in my quiet Chicago apartment with the snow starting to fall again, outside, they landed differently. He was not just trying to scare me, he was trying to rewrite reality, and I no longer lived in the version of reality he controlled. I let him repeat himself until his voice began to tire, the heat fading into a hoarse, strained sound. Then I told him, in that same steady tone, that I would not be changing anything. I said again that whatever the bank and his partners were doing now was between them and the paperwork he had signed. He cursed, a sound full of frustrated fury, then hung up on me. The line went dead. The apartment fell back into its soft, ambient hum. Outside, the snow brushed against the windows like quiet fingers. I sat there for a moment without moving, my heart pounding, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that always rushes in after surviving something intense. Then I reached for the phone, stopped the recording, and saved the file. I listened to a few seconds of it, just enough to confirm that his voice had come through clearly. The sound of him naming what he had done, insisting it was fine, blaming me anyway. My own voice near the middle, quiet and firm, drawing a line that had been missing from our relationship my entire life. Then I plugged the phone into my laptop and transferred the file. I saved it in more than one place. One on my computer, one in a secure cloud folder, one on a small flash drive I kept in the same safe as my printed documents. I dated the file in the name, added a few brief notes about context, and closed everything. Only then did I realize my hands were shaking, not from regret, from the weight of what had just shifted. For the first time, I had proof that did not rely on my memory or my interpretation. I had his own voice, his own words, telling a story he would never have admitted if he thought anyone else was really listening. The next morning, I forwarded the audio file to Ethan with a short email explaining when the call had taken place. I told him my dad had contacted me again through a different number and that I had recorded the conversation for my own safety. It did not take long for Ethan to respond. He wrote back that the recording could be incredibly important if my dad followed through on any of his threats. He said that the way my dad had described using my accounts and my social security number lined up with the documents the bank was now reviewing. He reminded me not to engage directly with any further accusations, to let him handle any formal communication. Reading his message, a strange sort of relief washed over me. For so many years, it had felt like my dad's voice was the only one that mattered, the only one people heard. Now there was a record that could not be talked away, minimized, or twisted into a different story. I closed my laptop and stood at the window again, watching the city wake up beneath a thin layer of snow. In the distance, I could see tiny figures walking dogs, heading to work, starting ordinary days. My life did not look ordinary from the inside, but for the first time, instead of feeling trapped in a story someone else wrote for me, I felt like I was quietly picking up the pen. I had no idea exactly how far my dad would go after realizing he was losing control. I only knew that this time, whatever he tried, I was not unprotected. I had my own shields now. His own confession sat on my computer, clear and undeniable. I was not afraid to use it if I had to. For the next day or two, the city felt strangely quiet, as if even Chicago was holding its breath with me. I worked, cooked, walked to the corner store for groceries, kept my headphones in while listening to calming music. I tried to keep my body moving so my mind did not get stuck replaying my dad's voice. But even with all that, I could feel the shift in the air. Something in my family had cracked open, and there was no putting it back. On the third, as I was locking my apartment door before heading to work, my phone vibrated. The screen showed one word: Sam. She rarely texted me first. When she did, it was usually a small hello or something funny she wanted to share. This message was different. It said only one sentence: "How did you get out from under him?" I froze in the hallway, keys still in my hand. The quiet desperation in those words made something twist deep inside my chest. I leaned against the wall and typed back gently, asking if she was safe and where she was. She replied that she was home, but hiding in her room, and she asked if I could meet her somewhere away from the house. I told her to meet me at Lincoln Park, near the pond, a place she used to love when she was younger. She sent back a small yes, and I knew she was already on her way. I changed directions, headed toward the train instead of the office, and let my manager know I was taking a personal day. When I got to the park, the wind was cold, but the sun had broken through the clouds, scattering light across the frozen water. I spotted Sam sitting on a bench near the path, hugging her knees to her chest. She looked so much older than the last time I saw her, and yet so heartbreakingly young at the same time. When she saw me, she stood up quickly, her eyes wide and glassy, like she had been holding her breath for days. She walked toward me with small, hesitant steps, and then she stopped a few feet away. Her voice was quiet and shaky when she spoke. "I do not know what to do anymore," she said. "I do not know who to trust." I took her hand and guided her back to the bench. We sat there side by side, elbows brushing, listening to the faint sound of geese somewhere in the distance. She rubbed her hands together, her fingers trembling. "Dad is yelling all the time now," she whispered. "Mom keeps telling him to calm down, but then she turns around and cries in the laundry room so he does not see. Sophia keeps calling me, asking if I knew anything, but I do not even know what she means. And Lindsay keeps telling me I have to stick with them, no matter what. She said you are destroying the family, and if I talk to you, I am taking side." She paused and wiped her cheek with her sleeve. "I am scared all the time, Aya." My heart clenched hearing that. She had always been the quiet one, the one everyone assumed was fine because she never demanded anything. No one in that house ever noticed how much she carried. I turned toward her. "Sam," I said softly, "breathe. I am here. You are not alone." She nodded, but her shoulders still shook. After a moment, she asked again, "How did you get away from him? How did you stop him from controlling everything you did?" I let the question sit for a moment. Then I answered honestly. I stopped believing the story he told about who I was, and I stopped letting him decide what I owed him. She stared at her shoes like she was trying to understand what that meant for her. I told her the truth, piece by piece. I explained that my dad used money as a weapon, as leverage, as a way to keep people dependent on him. I told her that once I realized that, I started separating myself slowly. Small steps at first, then bigger ones. She listened carefully, absorbing every word like she was anchoring herself to a safer world. I asked if she had her own bank account. She shook her head. "Dad checks everything," she said. "He signs all the forms. Mom says it is easier that way." I told her the first thing she needed was a private account in her own name, with a bank Dad could not access. I mentioned a credit union nearby, a quiet place without ties to Parker Financial. Her face tensed in worry, but I reassured her that teenagers opened accounts every day without anyone questioning it. Next, I told her to change her email passwords and phone passcodes, not because she had secrets, but because privacy was not a luxury in our family. It was a shield. She nodded slowly, like she had never considered that she was allowed to protect her own privacy. Then we talked about the future she wanted, but never voiced. She admitted that she had dreamed of becoming a teacher, not a model like Sophia, but Dad always told her that teaching was a waste of talent and would not make enough money. She said she never fought him because he made everything sound like a final decision. I told her she could apply for scholarships on her own, that she did not need permission to dream differently, that she could get a part-time job, even a small one, to start building her independence. She blinked away tears at that, as if no one had ever told her she had choices. "But he will be so angry," she whispered. "He will say I am ungrateful." I touched her hand gently. People who rely on control always get angry when someone steps out of their shadow. His anger does not mean you are wrong. It means you are growing. She cried then, quietly, shoulders shaking as she leaned into me. I held her the way I wished someone had held me at her age. I told her she was not invisible. I told her she mattered. I told her that being quiet did not mean she was weak. It meant she had survived in a place that rewarded silence more than honesty. After a long time, she sat up and wiped her face again. "I am not going to Maui," she said, her voice steadier than I expected. "Not with them. Not like this." I squeezed her hand. "I am proud of you," I said. A small, fragile smile crossed her lips. We stayed on that bench until the sun dipped lower, painting long shadows across the park. When it was time for her to leave, I walked her to the bus stop. Before stepping on, she turned and looked at me with fierce determination in her eyes. "Thank you for seeing me," she said. When the bus pulled away, I stood there watching it disappear down the street, feeling something warm settling in my chest. I had not saved my family. I was not trying to, but I had given Sam something she deserved a long time ago. A way out, a way forward. That evening, when I returned to my apartment, my phone vibrated with a rapid series of notifications. I sighed, knowing exactly what I would find. Lindsay, Sophia's dramatic and self-centered friend, had decided to create her own version of events online. She posted long paragraphs claiming I was jealous, bitter, and destructive. She said I had sabotaged the family company, that I had manipulated Sam, that I was trying to tear the sisters apart. It was the kind of empty drama she thrived on, gathering comments from people who knew nothing but believed everything. I read the posts, not with anger, but with a calm clarity. I had outgrown that entire world. I opened my laptop, drafted a brief email addressed to her, with a tone so neutral it was almost soothing. I explained that her posts were defamatory, that she was repeating false information about private financial matters, and that any further statements could result in legal consequences. I signed it simply with my full name, and the note that a copy of the email had been saved for documentation. I pressed send. 10 minutes later, every one of her posts vanished from the internet. She did not message me. She did not apologize. She simply erased the evidence of her impulsive cruelty, the way people do when they realize they have stepped into something far bigger than they expected. I closed my computer and turned off the lights in the apartment. The city glowed through my windows, a soft reflection of everything shifting in my life. I was not trying to hold anyone together anymore. Not my dad, not Mom, not Sophia. Not the illusion of a family built on fragile stories. I had chosen someone else to protect. Sam. And for the first time in years, that choice felt right. I stood there for a long moment in the quiet, letting the stillness settle. I knew more storms were coming. My dad would not disappear quietly. My mom would cling to her denial. The company would crack further. But something important had changed. Sam was no longer trapped in the dark with them. And I was no longer alone. The strange thing about real change is that it does not always arrive with shouting or doors slamming. Sometimes it comes as a series of small notifications and quiet conversations that slowly add up to something that cannot be undone. It started with an envelope. A few weeks after Sam told our parents she was not going to Maui, after Lindsay deleted her online drama, after my dad stopped calling for a while, I came home from work and found a thick letter in my mailbox. The return address was from a government office. My stomach gave that familiar, uneasy twist, but this time it was not fear for myself. It was recognition. Inside was a formal notice addressed to me as an individual and as someone, previously tied to Parker Financial. The language was dense and official, but the meaning was clear. The Internal Revenue Service had opened a full investigation into the company's financial records. Attached was a separate page confirming that my prior report of unauthorized use of my information was on file, and that, based on their findings so far, I was being treated as a victim, not as a participant. I stood in my kitchen reading the letter 3 times, feeling each word land. There it was, in plain language. The accounts were no longer just under review. The government had stepped fully into the picture. Later that week, I heard about the next development from Ethan. He called me on a Thursday afternoon while I was between meetings. His voice sounded steady, but there was a heaviness underneath it. He told me that the Internal Revenue Service had officially frozen the company's primary accounts. That meant no easy transfers, no quiet payments, no shuffling things around to hide holes. Everything was now pinned in place for inspection. He said that the shareholders, once content to let my dad handle the numbers on his own, were suddenly panicking. They wanted explanations, proof, leadership that did not crumble at the first sign of scrutiny. Within days, word reached me through the same business journal that had hinted at trouble before. The headline was blunt. The board of Parker Financial had voted to remove Charles Parker from his position. Effective immediately, he was no longer the man at the top of the pyramid he had spent most of his adult life climbing. I sat at my desk at work, staring at those words on the screen. Removed by his own partners, not hired and fired by some anonymous company, but pushed out by the people he had always believed he controlled. It felt surreal. it also felt inevitable. A part of me thought I would feel satisfaction, maybe even joy. Instead, what I felt most was a deep, aching sadness. He had been given every chance over the years to turn toward honesty, to make different choices, to correct course. He had chosen, again and again, to dig deeper into lies. The collapse was his, shaped by his own hands. Around the same time, the other pieces of his double life began to fall apart. Sophia called me one night from an unfamiliar number, her voice hoarse and tired. She said our dad's other family, the one I had known about for years but never exposed, had finally learned the truth about the money. The woman in San Diego had discovered that the rent payments and gifts and private school tuition for her children were coming from business accounts and credit lines that were now under investigation. She packed up, Sophia said, took the kids and left their house by the bay. She told him not to contact them until he figured out how to live honestly. And even then, she could not promise she would let him back into their lives. Listening to my sister, I pictured that woman, standing in a kitchen like Mom's, but in another state, realizing that everything she had been given came with hidden strings. I imagined the children hearing raised voices for the first time, watching boxes being filled, sensing that the steady world around them was not steady at all. My dad had spent so long juggling two households, two sets of expectations, two versions of the truth. Now both of them had started to crumble in his hands. In the middle of all this, Mom made a decision I never thought she would make. I got the news in an email, not a call. She wrote that she was tired. That word sat alone in its own sentence, like it had finally broken free from a place she had been hiding it. She said that a woman should not spend her entire life walking on eggshells for a man who refused to look at himself. She wrote that Aunt Susan in Arizona had offered her a place to stay for as long as she needed, and she was taking it. She did not frame it as a separation or a trial. She simply said she was leaving that house and that marriage behind. She wanted a smaller place in the desert, with clean light and no ghosts in there, walls. She wanted to volunteer at a community center near Aunt Susan, maybe help kids with reading. She wanted, for the first time in decades, to wake up without wondering whether her husband would erupt before breakfast. There was a part of me that wanted to ask, why now? Why not years ago, when the signs were already there? But another part of me, the part that knew how hard it was to step out of a role you had played your whole life, understood that leaving at all was an act of courage. Sam updated me in a late-night call a few days later. She said the house felt hollow. Dad wandered from room to room, snapping at shadows, blaming everyone but himself. Mom's clothes were gone from their closet. The framed photos from their trips were stacked in boxes by the door. Papers lay scattered on his desk, reminders of lawyers and audits and appointments he no longer controlled. In the middle of this, Sam had quietly done something for herself. She had applied to the School of Education at a state university and gotten in. Her voice brightened when she told me. She said she had read the acceptance email 3 times just to believe it was real. She would be studying to become an elementary school teacher, living on campus housing, meeting with an advisor who encouraged her to follow her own path. The modeling portfolio Dad had once memorized meant nothing there. What mattered was her desire to work with kids, to help them feel seen in a way she often had not. I sat on my couch with the phone pressed to my ear and let her talk about orientation and dorm assignments and class schedules. I could hear the hope in her words, fragile and bright. She was stepping out of the script he had written for her and picking up a pen of her own. Through all of this, my dad stayed oddly silent toward me. No more calls, no more voicemails, no more threats. For a while, it was like he had erased me from his reality completely, as if ignoring me might somehow undo the chain of events already in motion. Then, one afternoon, an email arrived. The sender's name made my stomach clench. I had not seen his name in my inbox since before he told me I was dead to him. For a moment, I considered deleting it without reading. Curiosity clawed at me, but instinct whispered that no good would come from giving his words more space in my mind. In the end, I did not open it fully. I only let my eyes skim the preview line. It was a single sentence. He wrote that everything that had happened was my fault. Not his decisions, not his secret accounts, not his forged signatures, not his lies to partners and clients and 2 families. In his mind, it all narrowed down to one simple cause. Me, the daughter who refused to keep carrying the weight of his choices. I stared at that sentence for a slow, measured moment. Then I clicked delete. The message vanished from my screen, taking with it the last little hook he might have used to pull me back into his story. Inside my head, a quiet thought formed. Not bitter, just true. I did not cause his collapse. I simply stopped acting as the rotten beam that kept his structure standing. The days that followed felt lighter, in a way that is hard to explain. The external situation was serious. Investigations do not end quickly. Reputations do not rebuild themselves overnight. My family's name in certain circles would be tied to words like audit and fraud for a long time. But inside my own life, there was a spaciousness I had never known. At work, I found myself more present. My ideas came more easily. I laughed with coworkers in the break room without feeling like I was carrying a secret storm cloud above my head. My manager mentioned in passing that I seemed more grounded lately, more confident in my decisions. I smiled and said thank you, knowing she had no idea how much that meant. In the evenings, I talked to Sam about her dorm shopping list and course catalog. I exchanged emails with Mom, carefully and with boundaries, as she sent photos of Arizona sunsets and stories about the women she met at the community center. They were small, simple connections, but they were real, honest, not wrapped in the expectation that I would fix anything. One weekend, when the weather finally softened and the ice around the city started to melt, I walked down to the lake. Lake Michigan stretched out in front of me like a sheet of shifting glass, gray and blue mixing together under a pale sky. The wind tugged at my hair and stung my cheeks, but I welcomed the sting. It made me feel awake. I stood near the railing and watched the waves roll in and out, steady and indifferent to human drama. People walked dogs behind me. Children laughed near the path. A couple took photos near the water's edge. Life moved forward, indifferent to the collapse of one man's false kingdom. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who believed her worth was tied to how much she could endure. I thought about every time I had reached for my wallet because my dad said the family needed my help. I thought about all the years I held up the image of a successful man who secretly used the people closest to him as currency. And then I thought about the woman I had become, the one who walked into a lawyer's office with a folder of evidence she had quietly collected for years. The one who said no when her dad demanded money she did not owe. The one who watched a family structure fall apart and did not rush in to act as glue. Standing there by the lake, listening to the steady slap of water against stone, I felt a chapter close inside me. Not with fireworks or a grand announcement, just a soft, sure settling of truth. That part of my life, the part where I twisted myself into knots to be what he wanted, was over. I turned away from the water and started walking back toward the city, the tall buildings rising ahead of me like a different kind of possibility. Behind me, the waves kept moving, erasing footprints in the damp sand as if they had never been there at all. I turned away from the lake and walked back toward the city, the tall buildings rising in front of me like the outline of a life that finally belonged to me. The cold air filled my lungs, sharp and clean, and for the first time in years, I felt no weight dragging behind my steps. A full year passed after that day by the water, not quietly and not without its challenges, but with a kind of steady forward motion I had never experienced before. My life did not transform overnight. It grew into itself little by little, the way a sunrise arrives not with a shout, but with a widening of light. 3 months after everything unraveled, I was promoted to senior director at the marketing firm where I had worked for nearly a decade. My boss said I had stepped into my own voice. I knew what he meant. I was no longer trying to earn approval from people determined not to give it. My ideas came stronger, cleaner, no longer diluted by doubt. With the promotion came a raise, and with the raise came the chance to finally move into the apartment I had always dreamed of. On the north side of Chicago, up near the lake, sat a corner unit on the 19th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows and a quiet that felt almost holy to me. The first night I slept there, I lay awake staring out at the city lights and let the stillness move through me. It was not silence born from fear or tension. It was peaceful. Sam visited often. She had finished her first semester in the School of Education, with grades she was proud of. She no longer whispered when she talked about her future. She spoke with excitement, confidence, a softness that made her look like the girl she should have been all along. We ate takeout on my living room floor, laughing about college dorm life and her students in the early childhood development course. She told me she felt safe for the first time. Every time she said that, something inside me settled in a way that words cannot capture. In the summer, Mom reached out with a handwritten letter. The envelope was pale blue, the paper thick and pressed with delicate little flowers. She said living in Arizona with Aunt Susan had opened her eyes to how small her world had been for so long. She apologized, not as a plea for forgiveness, but as a woman finally understanding the cost of her silence. I read it slowly at my kitchen table, letting each sentence come to rest inside me. She did not ask for anything. She did not try to twist her regret into expectation. She simply acknowledged what she had failed to see and what she could not undo. When I wrote back, I kept my words gentle but firm. I told her I wished her well. I told her I believed people could change, but change required consistency, not just intention. We wrote back and forth for months after that. Short letters at first, then longer ones. A careful rebuild, not of the mother-daughter relationship I had once wanted, but of the one we had now. Something honest. Something free of performance. As for my dad, I heard through Sam that he was living in a small condo on the edge of the B, suburbs. No title. No company, no second family, just a man left alone with the echoes of the life he had constructed out of other people's sacrifices. I felt no anger toward him by then, only a distant sadness that he had built a world so fragile it shattered them. Moment, no one was left to reinforce the walls. Sometime in early fall, I created something I had wished had existed when I was younger. A fund dedicated to women who had been financially controlled or exploited by family members. I named it quietly, anonymously, with no desire for credit. The fund provided small grants to help women open their own accounts, hire financial advisors, or simply create an emergency cushion so they would no longer feel trapped. When the first thank you letter arrived from a woman in Ohio who had used the fund to leave her brother's house after years of dependence, I sat alone in my living room and let tears fall freely. Not tears of grief, tears of release. By winter, I understood that I wanted to mark the end of this chapter with something bold, something beautiful, something that felt like my life was no longer being lived in response to someone else's chaos. I thought about Bali again. The soft beaches and the warm air, but it did not fit who I was now. I wanted something colder, wilder, untouched, so I booked a trip to Iceland. When I stepped off the plane onto the tarmac in Reykjavik, the air hit me like a clean sheet of ice. It woke every nerve in my body. The sky stretched endlessly, pale blue fading into silver. Mountains framed the horizon like ancient guardians. It felt like stepping into a place that did not care who I had been or what I had carried. It simply welcomed me as I was. I spent days driving along black sand beaches, soaking in hot springs surrounded by snow, watching waterfalls crash down cliffs with a force that made my chest tremble. The land seemed alive in a way that stripped away the last pieces of heaviness, clinging to me. On my final day, I hiked to a cliff near the southern coast. The wind was fierce, whipping my hair against my face, tugging at my jacket, pushing me forward and backward in one breath. Below me, waves crashed against dark volcanic rock, sending bursts of white foam into the air. I stood there with my boots planted firmly on the ground, the sky stretching wide above me. And for the first time in my entire life, I felt completely unbound. I closed my eyes and let the wind cut across my cheeks. At that moment, my dad's words from months ago flickered through my mind. "You are dead to me." The same words that once stung now felt weightless, almost absurd. I had not died. I had been reborn. I whispered into the wind, Not to him, not to anyone else, but to myself. I did not take revenge on them. I simply stopped sacrificing myself for them. The rest is their own reckoning. The wind carried the words away. I opened my eyes and let the cold seep into my bones, not as punishment, but as cleansing. A new beginning, held in the sharpness of winter air. When I finally turned away from the cliff and started walking back toward the trail, I felt something shift inside me. A doorway had closed, and another had opened somewhere I could not yet see. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.